Hi everyone! Thank you for joining us on another episode of Remarkable Spirit Memories of a Medium. My name is Gabrielle Gardner and I am a medium. That means that I see, feel, and hear the souls of those who are no longer residing in a physical body. Or in more traditional terms, they have died. Death as I have come to know it most definitely is not the end. It is simply the turning of a page after completing a chapter. Over the course of these shows, I would like to take some time to tell you about some of the most remarkable souls that I have met during this spirit work, and I would like to share their even more remarkable stories with you. Today I will be telling you about my time with a remarkable soul named Jerome. Jerome was a young man with a big attitude, tons of confidence, and a loud but lovable personality. He was a self-proclaimed ladies' man. He loved basketball. He was fiercely independent and unwaveringly loyal to those that he loved. He didn't sugarcoat what he wanted to say. He valued honesty. He always tried to make people laugh when the mood was heavy. And at his core, Jerome had always wanted to do and be good. Jerome did a tremendous job at helping me to better understand the process of what it's like when souls are in the in-between space, and the function of the guides creating the grid during the crossing ceremonies, so that I can better show and explain that all to you. And he gave us even more evidence of the afterlife. He also was adamant about sharing what led up to his violent death, and he shared some brilliant wisdom that he thinks can and will help others avoid ending up in a similar situation. But before we get into all that, let me jump back to the first time that I met Jerome. While out for a drive to get our dog chicken nuggets, yes, we get our dogs chicken nuggets, I was suddenly and unexpectedly overcome by a feeling of intense anxiety. It seemingly came out of nowhere as I had been enjoying the sunset and the fresh air, but my nervous system was instantly put into a state of panic. My hands started to shake, my heart rate shot up, and all of my senses became hypersensitive. Lights were too bright, the sound of the crinkling wrappers sounded like a leaf blower, and the motion of the car made my stomach lurch. Everything felt like chaos, and I felt intense fear. I told my mom, who was driving, that we had to stop or I was going to be sick. So I closed my eyes and put my fingers in my ears, and I put my head down to try to block out all of the sensory input that was coming in. And when I did that, I started to hear very loud gunshots. I could tell that these sounds were coming from spirit, but it was surprising how loud they actually were. Even with the deep breathing, the fear and anxiety was increasing. And then I heard a man screaming and yelling, but at that time I couldn't yet understand what he was saying. And then I was overcome with intense sadness and I began to cry. And then just as suddenly as it all came on, it was gone. I struggled to get my bearings, and I knew that by way of spiritual download that I had just felt a gang-related shooting that had happened near where we were in the car. But I was too tired to try to get any more information at that time. My body felt like I had just been in a car wreck, and I was so exhausted from what I had seen and felt that I just went home and went to bed early that night. But the next afternoon, while at home, the same experience started up again, the experience of panic and the heightened senses and feelings of chaos. But as it came on, I quickly told my guides that I cannot experience this way, or it's going to make me sick and I'm not going to be able to help him. After saying that, the sensations eased a bit, and then I heard the gunshots and yelling again. This time, though, I could understand what he was saying. He kept yelling, "Michael," over and over. He was saying, "Mike, Michael." And I could tell that he was intensely searching for somebody. That was the imprint that the guide showed to me. And then when I felt that, and I was shown a movie-style montage of a spirit download of what happened that night. The young man whose energy I was feeling, Jerome, was out driving with his friend. I could see them both sitting in the car next to each other with Jerome driving. Suddenly a car full of rival gang members pulled up on them and began firing. My view switched from looking in the windshield of Jerome's car to being above both the cars and looking down on them. Both cars slammed to a stop and everyone started getting out and yelling. I could see that all of them were very young, probably under 25. Michael and Jerome had dove in opposite directions in the middle of the shootout, and I watched as Jerome was shot in the chest. And he died there quickly on the pavement. But I could see that Michael had not been hit, and the guide showed that Michael was alive. At that point, I was pulled back to the present moment of sitting in my living room. The guides then showed me that what was happening on an energetic level was Jerome was unaware of what had happened to him in the moment of his passing. That's the reason that the guides connected my guides to Jerome. Put most simply, he was caught in the moment of his traumatic death, and he refused to leave it. It was clearly being shown that it was 100% his choice. The guides were trying to gently show him that he didn't need to stay there, but Jerome was hard-headed, and he just kept saying over and over that he needed to find Mike. At that point, I asked my guide, so what am I supposed to do? And he said, be patient, a bit of time, and he will be ready. So, slightly irritated that we couldn't speed the process up, I realized that I just had to let Jerome figure it out at his own pace. Over the course of the next 5 days, I continued having the same experience of being randomly pulled into Jerome's moment of trauma. I didn't gain much insight from these moments other than seeing clearly that the guides were doing what they could to show Jerome that he could see things differently, but he was refusing to do so. At that point, I still didn't know why he was so intensely denying his reality and the opportunities that were being given to him to get out of that moment. On the 6th day since meeting Jerome, while at an acupuncture appointment, I was laying on the treatment table processing and releasing a lot of energy from another spirit work case that was horrendous and involved the torture and death of a child. And that case was really affecting both my mental and physical health, so I was really focused on moving some of that energy during the appointment. But right as I was deep in that processing, Jerome's moment of death came up again. And in that moment, I had zero patience for Jerome, so I just said, dude, you're gonna have to wait. You have to give me space. I need time to process this other case, because it really sucks. I said, this isn't working. You have to figure out how to do it differently. I didn't really expect anything to change when I told him that, because he hadn't heard me up to that point. But I think that somehow that harsh call out towards him kind of kicked him out of his trauma loop for a minute. And for the first time since I met him, he was outside of that moment, and he was suddenly in the room with me and my acupuncturist. He was finally seeing and feeling something outside of his death trauma loop. The moment he came in, Melanie felt him in the room too, and she started picking up on his energy and who he was. And in a strange twist of events, Jerome temporarily felt free of his anger right after I kind of yelled at him for the way that he was interacting with me. I could feel him relaxing in that moment that he was in the room with us, and I think he felt safe and at ease just sitting there with the two of us. So after acknowledging him and telling him thank you for waiting, we continued with my appointment, and as I processed and cried over the other child's case, Jerome just sat there and he listened. And I could tell that he was also shocked and disgusted by how heinous the other crime was. And at one point he stopped listening and he said, yeah. He said, yeah, damn, that is worse. And then he said, I got you. You got to do that thing first. Go get it done. And then he left. We both laughed at his humor and how he tried to lighten this dark moment. And together we could start to feel that this was the kind of energy Jerome had when he wasn't feeling his trauma. That next afternoon, Jerome came into the living room. This time, he left his death loop, his trauma loop of the shooting, on his own, which was a huge moment of progress. And I knew that his soul had done a ton of processing through that night, which also meant that his crossing ceremony was going to be soon. After tuning into his energy for a couple of minutes, I knew that I would do his crossing that night. But first he wanted to talk. And again, this remarkable soul shared incredible insights and wisdom with openness and honesty. And this is what he said. Michael shouldn't even have been there. I was the one who pushed him into it. He would have been better off if he never met me. He was my homie from the time that we moved into the same apartments. The guides then showed me that because Jerome had felt so much guilt about getting Michael into that situation, that until yesterday, he wouldn't even pause his search to comprehend what they were trying to show him, which is that his best friend had actually survived the shooting. Because of the intense guilt, which was acting as a barrier to the truth, the guide showed that this full understanding of what really happened would only come to Jerome during the crossing ceremony. I listened as he continued talking. He said, "Everyone always treated me like I was going to be a screw-up, like I wasn't going to amount to anything, like I was already a failure. From the time I first started walking, they said I should just give up, trying to be anything better, and I'd end up just like everyone else around me." He said, "And then you know what happened? I believed them. I started to think it didn't matter what I did, so I started to hang with a really messed up crew. Because I listened when they said that no matter what, I was always going to be the loser they thought I was." He said, "And then you know what happened? I became that loser. I became exactly what they said I would, because I let them tell me who I was. I never even thought about figuring that out for myself. I felt like my life wasn't in my control, so I hung out with people who tried to take back control, guys who were cruel and did messed up things, just to feel little moments of power. I made my choices. I made bad choices. That's the only way to say it, and I own that. But it wasn't right that I was told I was going to fail, and that I had no control over my future. Hearing that stuff when you're a kid really messes you up. I don't know why I believed them, because from where I sit now, I had all the control. I was always the one who made the choices. I chose how I saw myself and the others in the world. That was my choice. I could have chosen to see it different." He said, "Maybe next time." And then he laughed. And at that point, I could see him start to casually dribble a basketball that he was suddenly holding. He dribbled the ball for a minute, just watching the ball bounce up and down. And then he stopped and he looked at me. He said, "Tell them that it's not worth it. The hype, the game, the lifestyle, it isn't worth it. It isn't worth what I gave up. All that fighting for little bits and pieces of power, all that scrapping to feel like a big man, it's not worth it. The only ones fighting for power are the ones who feel powerless inside." He laughed and said, "Damn, that sounded like some Yoda shit." He said, "I'm okay, but I see it now. I see that I gave it up because they said that I would. I gave up a shot at more life for the dumbest reasons. And I'm actually a pretty decent guy." And he laughed again. I told Jerome about what I do with the guides and the crossings, and I asked if it would be okay to show the ceremony so that others could better understand it. He laughed and he said, "Yeah, why not? It's a shame this handsome face never made it on TV. Guess it better happen now before I get kicked out of here for good." And then he was gone. And I smiled, feeling that his energy was lighter than ever, and I sensed that spirit was preparing for his crossing. Because Jerome was so cool with the process being shared, I decided to also do a communication session with him just prior to the crossing. And I'm excited to show you that footage now. This was done to help validate what he had told me so that you could hear some of the information straight from him. It also gave me another opportunity to share anything he wanted to before he moved to the place after this place. So the clips from this session that you're about to see have some of the best communication I have ever had with a soul in the non-physical, in which they gave the answers out loud so that everyone could hear them. I think that you'll be able to hear some remarkably clear answers come through from Jerome. I had my mom sitting with me and asking questions during this session as well, because I think that with this method of communication, he actually seemed to respond better to her. And looking back, I think it was because he liked her warm mom energy. So here's that footage from a communication session with Jerome using a device that scans through internet radio waves that can be manipulated by spirit for them to talk to us. Again, I'm speaking only to the teenager who passed in the gang shooting that I connected to about 2 weeks ago. Gang. So I do believe that you were shot and killed. Can you tell me where you died? Dead. Are you looking for your friend? Yep. Teammate. I heard teammate too. So I got one of the first things I got from you was that you love basketball and you just love watching basketball. Do you want to tell me your favorite basketball team? My team.
Can you say that again?
I can't tell. Okay, I'll ask you one more time. So I think I know it, and I even brought some stuff out for you. Can you say your favorite basketball team?
This is a safe place. So you're safe.
Michael.
Michael?
That's the name that I got.
Oh.
I have it written down.
So your friend is Michael?
Mike.
Okay. Right. So Mike was okay. All right. And
He was there.
he was there.
I can't find him.
So you know when you cross over, you'll be able to check in on Mike. So you'll know and be able to check in on him. So you don't have to worry about that anymore.
Michael.
Right, Michael. Yeah. You'll be able to check in on Michael. Images?
Yeah, images C.
Yeah. Yes, you'll be able to see him. Yeah, and you'll be able to see any of your family. My ear's going off. Yeah. Is there anyone in your family that
Okay, so I'm going to stop this session in just a minute and go ahead and start the crossing.
I
can't get it.
let me ask you what?
I know, I'm going to get it. So all you need to do is hang out here with us. Together.
Together?
Yep. So after that incredible communication session of hearing a number of direct responses from Jerome, it was clear that his energy had shifted even more and it was time for the crossing ceremony. Again, this process is in no way done by me, it is all by way of spirit. It is entirely facilitated by the guides and each one is unique for that specific soul's needs. It's to help them facilitate the processing of their personal trauma so that they can connect to guides and transition to the place of light and love. As I laid out the grid, I really got to know Jerome outside of the only moment of his life that I had seen, which was his death. At first, as his soul began to shed the traumas of his human life, Jerome went back into that very short, repetitive cycle of seeing and feeling the car that he was in slamming on its brakes and swerving, then hearing the gunshots, and then him and his friend jumping out of the car, ducking down, hiding behind the rear of the vehicle. It was like he needed to see and feel that loop that he had been in one more time to let it go. And as he heard the gunshots around him, he was feeling the intense fear for himself and his friend again. And he started yelling out, "Michael," over and over. And at that point, the guides helped to gently show Jerome that while he had been crouched down behind the car with bullets coming at him, that he had experienced a soul-fracturing trauma of fear for another that then became an intense guilt and an anger because he felt that he was responsible for getting his friend into that situation, and he thought that he got his friend killed. But as the ceremony continued, the guides were able to connect with him inside of that loop for the first time and show Jerome that he had been struck by a bullet. I hadn't fully realized until that moment that Jerome had refused to look at his death and accept his death. So ultimately, he had been in the in-between space because at the time of his passing, he refused to see the guides who were there with him to help him cross. He chose to keep looking for his friend instead. But spirit is strange and non-linear in time and place, and he was in that short 2-minute, 3-minute loop of the shooting for a while, but to him it only felt like a few minutes. As the crossing continued, the guides were there with Jerome, showing him that his anger and his guilt were acting as blinders. He was so intensely headstrong and defiant that he wanted to find his friend on his own. But in that moment, he finally heard them. He finally took a deep breath and he relaxed. He stopped looking and he just stood there. And then he was able to see it. He was able to actually look at his body so that he could accept his death. And then he let the guides show him that Michael had survived. And the way his energy shifted at that time was incredible. As soon as he saw Michael was alive and he released his heavy people trauma, his vibration lifted and he immediately crossed into the place of warmth and love and light. And I felt a tremendous celebration from spirit as Jerome moved to the place where he is meant to be. That was the last time that I saw Jerome until he visited last night while I was preparing to film this. I told him thank you for letting me share his story. And I asked him if there was anything else that he wanted people to know. And this is what he said. You all have to, excuse me. You all have got to start valuing the lives of strangers again. You've got to value the life and the energy of others. He said others should have valued my life more and I should have valued my life more. Trivial things like small differences are not worth taking a life. Life in all forms is meant to be valued, cherished, and honored. I thought that was beautiful. What Jerome said may sound overly simplified, and I'm not blind to that, but sometimes putting it in simple terms is when clarity can be found. The way we treat the other souls that we meet in this lifetime matters. People resort to violence when they feel like they are not in control of their life and they're not having their basic needs met. And souls must always be reminded of their free will and autonomy. Telling a soul that you expect less of them because of any temporary identifier such as a physical vessel feature, a societal measure such as income or housing. If you tell any soul that because they are having a hard time or they are at a disadvantage because of something different about them, and that you expect less of them, you do absolutely no good for that soul. You are only cementing this concept that they are in some way lesser than, and then they begin to embody that energy you project onto them, which is absolutely absurd. They begin to believe that they are not an equal, and that they cannot achieve equality without assistance, that they cannot change their path, that they are a victim to circumstance, and that their life is out of their control. That is the exact opposite of what should be happening to help souls heal these deep wounds that sometimes lead to acts of violence. Spirit shows that souls should be reminded of their power and their strength and their resilience, and that every single moment that arrives brings a new opportunity to choose something different. On that same note, I've heard so many people say, expect less so that you won't get hurt when things don't meet your expectations. But Spirit says no. Expect the best. Expect incredible, amazing, beautiful things to happen every single day. And eventually more of that will come. And Spirit shows the importance of increasing your resilience for times that are unpleasant and painful by finding your center, improving your confidence in your self-worth, and truly embodying the energy that is within you. Surround yourself with people who make you feel loved, who make you feel strong, and who celebrate your presence. Limit your time with people who compete with you and treat you as a burden and try to make you feel small. Be with people who encourage you to grow. Spirit has shown that unprovoked acts of violence or extreme violence in response to something petty are always, without fail, rooted in insecurity and pain, either a physical pain or a pain in the heart center. Violence is always, without fail, a reaction to pain in most cases. And generally, it is a displaced reaction, an externalized representation of the energy that is felt internally. So, I'll close this by sharing the final thing that I asked Jerome last night. I said, so how do we fix this problem? The problem you experienced and that you had that ultimately led to your death. And this is what he said. He said, I don't have that answer, but I do know that if we can magnify the importance of a life and help people see that each soul that we encounter is unique and different and is capable of good things, and that every single one of us is connected, that will help. He said it's easy to believe the narrative of separation while you're there, but tell them that we are all connected. You may think that an event happens and that when it's over, it's done, but that isn't how it works. Every single experience that has ever occurred has ripple effects that radiate out into other experiences, which go into other experiences, and it just keeps going. Tell them to make sure that the waves coming from their actions lead to positive things. That's how it can start to change. How cool is that? He said it better than I've ever heard it, and I think that Jerome's wise words are a beautiful way to end. As always, I am honored and grateful to be able to do this work, and I'm eternally grateful to the guides and the angels and the source from which we all come. My name is Gabrielle Gardner, and this has been another episode of Remarkable Spirit. Please join us again next time to see how Remarkable Spirit is all around us.